Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Today we're diving into a Reddit post that really blew up.
Oh, yeah. This one's a doozy.
It's from the Irrelationship Advice subreddit.
Always a good source of drama.
You know it. This one's all about a wife who's feeling really lost in her marriage.
Lost is an understatement from what I read.
She and her husband have been together since high school.
Wow, so they've basically grown up together.
Exactly. They're in their 30s now, married for a few years, but things have gotten rocky.
Long-term relationships are definitely a roller coaster.
That's for sure. So she starts off the post by saying she feels incredibly distant from her husband. Like he's just checked out emotionally.
And I bet that's a painful realization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She finally gets him to open up about what's going on, and he drops this bombshell. He's frustrated. He feels like they're sexually incompatible.
That's a tough one.
It gets even more complicated because she goes on to explain that her husband has a way higher sex drive than she does.
That's a pretty common issue for couples.
Oh, for sure. And to make matters even more delicate, he's really interested in exploring anal sex, which she's just not into.
Okay, so that adds another layer of complexity to their situation.
You know it. And that's where the Reddit thread just explodes. People had all sorts of opinions.
The internet, never a shortage of opinions, right?
Some people immediately jumped on her case.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, they were all about wifely duties.
You mean like she's not keeping her man satisfied?
Exactly. That kind of stuff.
That's so reductive. It's not that simple.
I know. Luckily, others were a lot more understanding.
That's good to hear.
They were acknowledging that different libidos and sexual preferences are completely normal.
Which they are. It's all about how you work through these differences as a couple.
A lot of people also started speculating that the husband might cheat
Oh, wow. It went there.
or that he's going to end up resenting her.
That's the danger, right? When those needs aren't met, it can really fester.
And that's exactly what she's worried about.
Yeah, I bet.
She says he's started treating her more like a roommate.
So he's pulling away
It's like he's trying to protect himself from more hurt.
by detaching emotionally.
Right. And it's breaking her heart because she misses the intimacy.
Not just the sex, but like the everyday affection.
Even just hugs and kisses. The simple stuff.
Intimacy has so many layers.
So you can see how complicated this whole situation is.
Absolutely. We've got a wife feeling heartbroken and terrified of losing her husband, a husband feeling frustrated and rejected, and a whole bunch of Redditors adding their 2 cents.
It's a recipe for a juicy deep dive, for sure.
We get to unpack the psychology of long-term relationships, you know, how those needs and expectations shift over time.
And of course, the importance of communication, how to bridge those gaps.
Can't forget about communication.
But wait, there's more.
There's more.
Remember how I mentioned an update?
Oh, yeah, the plot thickens.
It takes this whole thing to a new level. Buckle up.
Okay, you've got my attention.
In this update, she shares how she tried to make things better by following some of the advice from those Reddit comments.
Interesting. Like what?
For example, she stopped initiating sex because she realized it was just making him feel worse about the situation.
So she was trying to be considerate.
Makes sense.
But was it genuine? Or was it just to appease him?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she even tried, get this, wearing a butt plug
Whoa.
to
Okay.
show she was open to exploring, his interests.
That's a pretty bold move.
But here's the thing.
What happened?
It didn't exactly go over well.
I can imagine.
It felt performative, not genuine.
Which probably just added to his frustration.
Exactly. Like actions speak louder than words, right?
Especially in a situation like this.
She also mentioned making an effort to be more physically affectionate in those non-sexual ways.
Like cuddling, holding hands.
Things like that.
Did it help?
Her husband appreciated the effort, but it didn't really address the core issue.
The libido difference?
Right. And then comes the real bombshell. In the update, she admits that she only really wants sex like a couple of times a month, and she almost never initiates.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that's when those Reddit comments took a sharp turn.
People changed their tune.
Some of the people who were siding with her started to understand where her husband was coming from.
It's all about perspective, right?
And then, to make matters even crazier, she drops another bombshell.
What now?
They're planning on starting a family soon.
Are you serious?
You can imagine the reaction.
Yeah, the comment section probably exploded.
Everyone was worried about bringing a child into this already complicated situation.
That's a whole other layer of complexity.
Totally. And suddenly the focus shifted back to her.
Back to the wife.
People were concerned about her lack of contribution to the relationship,
It's like they were worried his resentment would just grow over time.
especially with a baby on the way.
It's that balance, right? Individual needs versus the needs of the relationship.
It's tough to find that sweet spot.
And it requires open and honest communication.
Always. But before we jump into all of that, I want to highlight some of those juicy comments.
Oh, the good stuff.
The ones that really made us stop and think.
I'm ready. Hit me with those insightful comments.
All right, so this one commenter really got us thinking. They talked about different libido styles.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
They used these terms reactive versus proactive libidos.
I love that.
Me too. It's such a clear way to explain it.
It really highlights how desire works so differently for everyone.
Like some people are just, always in the mood.
That's the proactive libido.
Right. They have those urges. They initiate more often.
Then there are those who are more reactive.
Their desire is sparked by specific situations, moods, or triggers.
And neither one is better or worse.
But understanding those differences can make a huge difference for couples.
Especially when they're feeling mismatched.
Totally. Okay, another comment that really stuck with me was about the husband's emotional state.
Okay, yeah.
The commenter said he must feel like he constantly has to get her going.
Oof.
And that can be exhausting.
It can make you feel so rejected even if your partner doesn't mean it that way.
It's a lot of emotional labor.
Exactly. And when you're always the one pursuing, it creates this imbalance in the relationship.
Okay, and there was another comment about the wife's overall contribution to the relationship.
Interesting.
This commenter pointed out that she doesn't work outside the home.
Okay.
She splits chores with her husband.
Right.
And she rarely initiates sex.
So the commenter was basically questioning her effort.
In a way, yeah. It brought up this whole idea of fairness and reciprocity in relationships.
It's not about keeping score, but both partners need to feel like they're contributing and receiving.
Otherwise, it's a recipe for resentment.
Exactly. It's like that saying relationships are a two-way street.
So we've got all these different perspectives swirling around.
It's complex, that's for sure.
It makes you think about communication, intimacy, and those unspoken expectations in long-term relationships.
That's a lot to unpack.
But now I'm dying to hear your take on all of this.
All right, let's dive in. This story really highlights how those unspoken expectations can create these huge rifts.
And the lack of communication, especially about intimacy.
Right. But before we go any further, I think we need to understand those bigger factors at play.
Like what?
Well, societal norms, gender roles, all of that stuff that influences how we view sex and relationships.
It's like we're all programmed with this outdated script.
Where men are supposed to have the high sex drive and always be the initiators.
And women are supposed to be more passive.
Exactly. And those stereotypes can be so damaging.
They create all this pressure to conform.
Which leads to shame, guilt, resentment, especially when those expectations don't match your reality.
It's like trying to squeeze into a box that's way too small.
Perfect analogy. And it's so important to remember that desire exists on a spectrum.
What's considered normal can be totally different for different people.
And it can change over time, even within the same relationship.
So how do we break free from those stereotypes and start having more honest conversations?
It can be so awkward, especially about sex.
Right, like where do you even begin?
It starts with self-awareness.
Understanding our own needs and desires first.
Exactly. And knowing your boundaries. Once you have that foundation, then you can communicate effectively with your partner.
Okay, that makes sense. But exploring your own sexuality can be intimidating.
It is. But the more comfortable you are with yourself, the easier it is to have those open and honest conversations with your partner.
And once you have that self-awareness, how do you actually bring it up?
It still feels awkward.
Totally.
Vulnerability is key.
So approach the conversation with empathy.
Yes. Curiosity and a non-judgmental attitude.
It's not about pointing fingers or demanding change.
It's about exploring together, finding that mutual understanding.
Okay, so like instead of saying, you always want sex and it's driving me crazy.
Right, which is accusatory.
You could say something like, hey, I've noticed we're not on the same page sexually, and I want to understand your needs better.
Much better.
So framing it as a team effort.
Exactly. Make sure both partners feel heard and validated.
But what about when those needs are just so different, like in this Reddit couple's case?
Yeah.
Can you really bridge that gap?
It's definitely possible.
It can be done.
But it takes compromise, being open to new things, and maybe even redefining what sexual fulfillment means for the relationship.
So it's not just about how often you have sex.
It's about the quality of the intimacy.
And the type of intimacy.
Exactly.
So even if their libidos are different, couples can explore other ways to connect.
Like more non-sexual touch, cuddling, massage, just holding hands.
It's expanding the definition of intimacy.
Yes. And it's about trying new things, finding activities that both partners enjoy.
Even if it means stepping outside your comfort zone.
Exactly. Experiment with different positions, toys, maybe even explore fantasies you've been hesitant to share.
That takes a lot of vulnerability.
It does, but that's where the excitement comes in. When you can approach your sexual relationship with that curiosity and sense of adventure.
Okay, now I want to go back to the whole anal sex thing. It seemed to be a big sticking point for this couple.
That's a topic a lot of people avoid discussing.
But it comes up a lot in situations like this.
Yeah, it's a common point of contention.
And it's often surrounded by so much shame and misinformation.
It makes it even harder to talk about openly.
So how can couples approach this topic in a way that feels safe and respectful?
Education and open communication are key.
So like, if one partner wants to explore anal sex, they need to understand their partner's concerns.
Exactly.
And be willing to talk about any anxieties or fears.
Research the topic together, maybe. Set clear boundaries around what feels comfortable for both of you.
So it's like any other sexual activity.
It needs to be consensual. You need to communicate, focus on mutual pleasure.
Okay, now what about the husband's decision to view his wife as a roommate?
I know, that struck me too.
It's like he was trying to protect himself from more hurt.
It's a common coping mechanism.
But does it ever really work?
It's not a solution. It might provide temporary relief, but it stops the couple from addressing the real issues.
Like shutting down emotionally.
Exactly. And that can impact every aspect of your relationship. You lose that connection, the intimacy, and it can even lead to resentment.
So what's the alternative? How can the husband express his needs without making his wife feel pressured?
He needs to be vulnerable.
Express his feelings without blaming her.
Right. So instead of saying, you never want to have sex with me, he could try, I feel hurt and rejected when I'm constantly turned down, and it makes me feel less connected to you.
So focus on the feeling instead of the action.
Exactly. And it invites her to empathize with him.
It helps her understand the impact of her actions, even if she didn't mean to hurt him.
So you're creating that space for dialogue.
Where both partners feel safe to share.
Exactly. That open communication is the foundation for a healthy sexual relationship, no matter your libidos or preferences.
So what advice would we give this couple?
Or any couple dealing with sexual incompatibility.
Yeah. What are the steps they can take?
Well, there's no magic solution, but there are some key principles.
Okay, like what?
First and foremost, honest and compassionate communication.
That's always number one.
Each partner needs to feel safe expressing their needs, their desires, their concerns, without judgment.
Maybe set aside dedicated time to talk about sex.
That can be helpful. Create a non-threatening environment. Practice active listening. Really hear each other.
It's about teamwork.
Exactly. And that teamwork means exploring each other's sexuality with curiosity and an open mind.
So how do you do that?
Read books or articles about sex and relationships.
That could be fun.
It can be. Try new things together. Maybe even seek guidance from a therapist.
Someone who specializes in couples and sex therapy.
Yeah, they can provide that safe space to really explore those individual needs and concerns.
And help them communicate more effectively.
And remember, communication is an ongoing process.
It's not a one-time fix.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of openness and vulnerability.
Where they feel comfortable sharing their desires and concerns.
Without fear of judgment.
And be patient. Change takes time.
Absolutely. Celebrate those small wins along the way.
Okay, now remember, this couple was planning to start a family soon.
Oh yeah, that added another layer of complication.
What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, bringing a child into the world is a huge decision. It can totally transform your relationship.
And if you're already struggling with intimacy and communication,
it can magnify those issues.
So maybe it's best to work through those challenges before becoming parents.
It's definitely something to consider. Parenthood can be incredibly rewarding, but it requires a strong foundation.
That makes a lot of sense.
Now, it's important to remember this Reddit post focused on a heterosexual couple.
Right.
But these challenges can come up in any relationship.
No matter your sexual orientation or gender identity.
Those key principles, communication, empathy, and exploration, are universal.
It's about recognizing that everyone has unique needs and desires.
And finding ways to navigate those differences respectfully.
So that everyone feels fulfilled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes, despite the love and history, you realize you're just not compatible.
What happens then?
That's when things get really tough.
It's a tough decision.
Some couples might explore alternative relationship structures.
Like open relationships or polyamory.
Right, to fulfill those needs outside of the primary partnership.
But sometimes you have to accept that it's time to move on.
Even if it's painful,
Yeah.
honesty, self-respect, and open communication are essential.
No matter what you decide.
Right.
That's such a powerful message. What stood out to you the most about this Reddit story? What really resonated with you?
It was just so raw and vulnerable, you know?
Like you mean.
It reminded me that even in those seemingly perfect relationships, there can be these hidden struggles.
And unmet needs that can cause so much pain.
And it also highlighted the power of those online communities.
Where people can share their experiences and find support, even for sensitive topics like this.
It's a reminder that you're not alone, and there's no shame in seeking help or advice.
From friends, family, therapists.
Oh, even Reddit.
You never know where you'll find wisdom.
Yeah.
Wow, that was a lot to take in.
I know, right?
We covered so much ground today.
These deep dives always get me thinking.
Before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay, I like it.
If you were a friend to this couple, what advice would you give them?
That's a tough one.
It's so easy to get caught up in those Reddit comments.
And offer these simple solutions. But real life is messy.
It's way more complicated.
Exactly. That's what I love about these deep dives.
We're not trying to judge.
Right. We're just trying to understand.
And there's no one right answer.
So if you were a friend to this couple, you wouldn't want to tell them what to do.
You just encourage them to think about everything we talked about today.
To seek out professional help.
From a therapist who specializes in couples and sex therapy,
Someone who can provide that safe space for them.
to explore their needs and concerns.
And help them build those communication skills.
You'd also remind them that communication is a journey.
It's not a one-time fix.
It's about being open and vulnerable with each other.
all the time, so they feel comfortable sharing what they want and what they're worried about.
And of course, be patient
Change takes time.
and celebrate those little wins along the way.
For sure.
And maybe, just maybe, gently suggest that they rethink having a baby right now.
Until they've worked through these issues,
Because adding a child to the mix.
it can make things even harder.
So it's important for them to prioritize their own well-being first.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has been such a powerful reminder about the importance of communication
And empathy.
and really knowing yourself.
It's not easy, but it's so worth it.
And it's okay to ask for help.
Don't be afraid to reach out to friends, family, therapists.
Whoever you trust.
They can offer support and guidance.
Speaking of support, we would love to have yours too.
Yes.
If you're enjoying these deep dives into relationships, hit that subscribe button and leave us a review.
It really helps others find the show.
And for even more insightful content on relationships, personal growth, and everything in between.
Check out Shauna Pelage on YouTube.
We love connecting with you all.
It's amazing to have these conversations together.
So as we wrap things up today, I want to encourage you to keep thinking about what resonated with you.
What insights will you take with you?
How can you apply what we talked about to your own life and relationships?
Keep those conversations flowing.
Keep those minds open.
And most importantly, keep those hearts open.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Voices of the Soul.
Until next time.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.